Good morning, everyone. I am Kamala Ramprasad de Silva, Chief Executive Officer of the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the launch of Trinidad and Tobago Corporate Governance Disclosure Rankings, a project that was done in collaboration with the Arthur Lockjack Global School of Business. I am so excited that this launch has been fully subscribed. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome. Many of you are new to this institute, so in welcoming all of you, I want to share that the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute is a nonprofit membership organization, and we welcome everyone who wishes to join in our purpose of improving corporate governance practices in the region. We offer a wide range of training and development programs, such as our certificate in corporate governance, as well as workshops and masterclasses. Huge discounts are offered when you are members. Please join us. Membership forms are available on our website. As we come to this specific event, this is the third time that the Arthur Lockjack Global School of Business is leading this exercise to review and rank the level of disclosure by companies listed on the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange. This exercise was started when the Lockjack GSB collaborated with Rotman's business out of the University of Toronto a few years ago. Dr. Rang Sukram, who is the project lead for this exercise, and also a director here at CCGI. We are pleased that we've been able to offer him support along with one of our other directors, Joanne Salazar, who herself is extremely passionate about governance. So as you would see from the agenda that was sent out to you this morning, after these opening remarks, we will invite the CEO of the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange, Ms. Eva Mitchell, to offer brief remarks. We will then hand over the session to Dr. Ram Sukram, who will provide background and context to the study, and then invite Joanne Salazar to share on the findings and some implications. Ron will then invite our three special panelists. Ms. Wendy Kerry, Senior Vice President, Corporate Governance and Corporate Secretary at Massey Holdings, Mr. Archibald Campbell, Chairman of JMMB Group, and Mr. Dave Garcia, Group General Counsel and Corporate Secretary, NCB Financial Group. They will each share for 8 to 10 minutes, forgive me, 8 to 10 minutes each before engaging in a discussion when we will also invite you to share comments or ask questions. So before we go into the first session, we have some brief housekeeping announcements. We'd like to ask everyone, please, to ensure that your microphones remain on mute during the session. You can post questions or comments in the chat feature. And if you are invited to speak, we ask that you unmute yourself, speak very briefly with your question or comment, and then please press the mute icon again so as to minimize any disruptive noises. Technical support is provided for us today in this online environment by Christy Johnson-Crouch from SmartServe. Christy provides all the support we need for our online Zoom meetings, and she does a really excellent job. So if you need this kind of support, you can reach out to her as well. Do note that today's session is also being recorded, and Christy will send the link to the recording as well as copies of the presentations from Ron and Joanne for you afterwards. You may use these sessions to claim CPDs for those of you who need it for ongoing certification. To get this, however, you need to send us an email request at info@caribbeangovernance.org. You will have to have been registered for this session, and we will verify your presence before issuing the certificate of participation with CPD hours. I would like to just share very briefly on two major events we have coming up here at the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. Our signature event, Governance Week, will be held from June 26th to July 1st with the theme, Developing the Conscience of the Board. The opening keynote will be delivered by former chairman of the Institute of Directors UK, Charlotte Villet. And we are very thankful to our sponsors for this event. We have our gold sponsor, First Citizens Bank, a silver sponsor, Republic Bank Limited. And we have 3 bronze sponsors, PwC, Angostura, and GMMB Bank. Thank you so much for your contribution. As we know too, the global environment is changing rapidly, and it is important for our directors and senior managers to be aware of these changes and implications for our region. With this in mind, we are also hosting our Great Wealth Transfer Series, which begins this Monday. It's 3 Mondays beginning May 9th, 16th, and 20th. Among the sessions we'll be addressing are issues such as the global minimum tax, the implications of digitization for economies. And many of you here would be aware of the arrest of the Premier of BVI by the DEA enforcement officials of the US. One of the key concerns raised out of that issue was the charge, in fact, in the affidavit, which said that he offered to set up shell companies in order to facilitate the fraudulent passage of monies. And this, of course, impacts the reputation of the region. So these and many other issues will be addressed in our Great Wealth Transfer Series. So we invite you to join us from a Monday coming. Of course, we have a range of other events. We are very busy here at CCGI, but I know that all of you are excited to be here today for the disclosure rankings. And so we move to that aspect of our program. And I want to invite the CEO of the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange, Ms. Eva Mitchell, to share some brief remarks.
Hi, thank you, Kamala, and good afternoon or good morning to everyone. Very, very happy to have given the opportunity to speak on this panel this morning and deliver some welcoming remarks. The Tobago Stock Exchange welcomes this initiative as it will only boost our confidence in the transparency of the local market and the cap markets on a whole. The Stock Exchange is a self-regulatory organization which is responsible for developing and administering the rules for operating within the framework of the local stock market. The TTSC oversees the listed companies to ensure compliance. However, strict adherence to same is not definitively measured. Having such a metric would provide investors with additional information that can be used to inform their investment decision. We at the Stock Exchange deem a good corporate governance structure as a key ingredient to the overall success of any organization, and it is an important element to investment analysis. As a regulator, we must lead by example, so we are not exempt to this. To show that we have also taken steps towards good corporate governance, in 2012, the Stock Exchange was demutualized. Demutualization refers to the change in legal status of an exchange from a mutual association with 1 vote per member into a for-profit limited liability company with 1 vote per share. We are demutualized with 32 shareholders owning roughly 1.5 million in issued shares and equity over 60 million. So in layman's terms, the stock exchange crept an inch closer to being a more democratically and transparently governed institution. Just to give some history, the stock exchange was formally established in 1981 by the Securities Industry Act of that same year. From that year until 1997, the exchange was funded by the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, and we actually were housed in the bank's premises. In 1997, the exchange was incorporated as a private limited liability company, and the existing assets were transferred to this new entity. At the end of December 1997, the board of directors was comprised of 5 stockbrokers only. By 1998, the board had been expanded to 10 members, 5 elected by the brokers and 5 by the listed companies. In 2003, new articles of amendment provided for an 11-member board comprising 4 persons from listed companies, 4 from among the stockbrokers, and 3 independent directors. This structure became effective in 2004 and remained in effect up until April 4th, 2012. The board currently consists of 10 members comprising of independent and non-independent members, which allows for open and dynamic discussions from a combination of disciplines across the capital markets, across general management, finance, regulatory, compliance, and risk management. A fair and efficient capital market is a public good. A well-run exchange with fair and meaningful representation is a key part of the capital market, and we are doing our part. We at the TTSC fully support this initiative as it is an indicator on the importance institutions attach to shareholder rights, their public disclosure activities, relationship with stakeholders, and the overall credibility of its board members. Having a good legal framework is important for an economy and the firms operating in it. I thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon, and I look forward to the benefits that this initiative will bring. And I would like to congratulate the CCGI and the Arthur Lockjack Rabbit School on this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva. And we absolutely appreciate the support of the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange as well. So at this point, I would like to hand over today's proceedings to the project lead for this exercise, that is Dr. Ron Sukram.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Kamala, and all the panelists who have been so helpful in actually agreeing to be present with us today, and for you, the members of the audience, to tune in at least to understand what we are doing and what we are trying to promote as it relates to improving governance practices in TNT. Now, as Kamala would have mentioned, this is our third iteration of this project, okay? And though a bit delayed for 2020, for obvious reasons, the school, as well as the CCGI, continues to be very committed in promoting good corporate governance practices, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but ultimately regionally. So this is why we considered disclosure practices as one of the areas that we can focus on as a way of improving and guiding as much as we can companies to reconsider the way in which they would have reported. Because reporting, which is of course disclosing, is essentially the main tool which companies, investors, stakeholders can access or use to really and truly understand a company. So reporting puts information in the hands of the markets, and the markets will make decisions on that type of information. Now, what I wanted to state very early is that the ranking project, this disclosure, has nothing to do per se with whether or not companies on the local stock exchange met the requirements of reporting. I want to emphasize that all listed companies on Trinidad and Tobago have met their legal requirement. They have complied fully as required, and therefore our focus is really on options that are not required, which is the voluntary type of information that companies can provide, and some do, as you will see, but opt because it's not legally required. We are focusing, therefore, on non-financial information that is not required for disclosure. And especially as we look at the changing market landscape and economic landscape in terms of a stakeholder world we live in, where issues such as ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance issues, are now very much in our faces in terms of how they are linked to the reputation of an organization, and by extension, the impact companies will have on the broader society and its constituents. The report and the disclosure that we are looking at is slanted towards this ESG, let's say, category of reporting. Now, so therefore, that shaped the objectives of what we are trying to do. So in the overarching aim is to promote good governance, okay? And we are looking at it through disclosure as an angle. But through this ranking study, we're trying to identify opportunities where companies can use to improve their ESG reporting, we are trying to provide a quantifiable, measurable scoring in that sense, or an evaluation that could guide companies how they can improve among themselves and against each other, if you may put it as a competitive kind of challenge. And of course, with such improvement and such a level of disclosure, the hope ultimately is to enhance the confidence among the market players, okay? As simple as that. However, what I want to emphasize is that in doing this type of evaluation, the focus was not to assess the substance of the report and the governance structures and systems of the organizations per se. Our emphasis is simply to look at the content that was disclosed and to confirm that there is a reporting or disclosure process and procedure in place in the organization. Okay, so our approach was simple in the sense that we are trying to look at an objective way to just verify the content disclosed among these ESG criteria in the reporting of our local listed companies, both against what we consider to be international benchmarks of governance and the national TNT corporate governance code. So we are looking at it from that perspective. And we are looking at disclosure as well, particularly because it is a means through which that companies themselves can do some self-examination, okay? Because through that reporting assessment and how you stack up against each other or against what we have created as a ranking system, companies that subject themselves to internal examination can always have that continuous approach and process of improving. We could also compare against the external players and therefore know where you lie within that domain. And of course, we understand that the public consumption of disclosure of information becomes quite critical in what you do. But the examination, self-examination is also, as you will, in any other management operation practices, is one way that you can continue your individual enhancement and improvement. So the source document, and therefore our primary and only source of information to inform our assessment, it will be the annual report of each company, okay? So we did not go to your website, we did not go anywhere else. We looked at what would be a formal annual report submitted to the SEC, for example, and this is what will be the basis of information to do our evaluation. So in forms of a method, we would have assessed each company against the standards or benchmarks that we have used, as well as the local governance code. And therefore we will score you accordingly based on what the content has in providing information on these criteria or benchmarks. And as a result, the aggregated score or the total score for each company will be tallied. And of course, the ranking will be based on the total score of each company in this listed group of companies that we have looked at. So essentially, this is our research or our project evaluation method. It's clear-cut. We are not, as I said, questioning the substance of the report and the governance structures of the company. This is much more of a complex assessment to do, as well as it can be subjective. What we are doing here is arguably very objective and straightforward, okay? In terms of our international benchmarks, these have been informed by various, I will say, sources, governance-related sources, codes that are international, the OECD, even the recent ISO 37000 corporate governance guidelines, and therefore the literature that generally promotes what they consider to be good governance practices. There are many others, but we have captured about 27 of these benchmarks that are much more relevant to us and in the context in which we operate. So these are, ladies and gentlemen, the general background, the overview, and therefore the method that we have used in this project. I'll now invite quickly Ms. Salazar, Joanne, to share with you now, I think the most critical part of today's proceeding. I opted to give her this option of presenting the results, and after which we will get into the panel session, and I hand you over now to Joanne. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me quickly share my screen. I'm assuming everybody's seeing those slides, yes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Great. Okay, good morning. Well, everybody's been saying good morning, but I think now it's good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Kamala, for that, and for the for Eva from the Stock Exchange as well, who's a very critical. The Stock Exchange was a very critical partner in developing the Trinidad and Tobago Code. And thank you, Dr. Sukram. I'm going to now, without a drum roll, get immediately into the results. Just mention some of the most common areas that were disclosed when we compared the companies to the international codes. Look at the compliance that we found with the Trinidad and Tobago Code. And then touch on the gender diversity, because we were in the reports, we were picking up the details, so we picked up some more information which picked up the gender diversity of the boards of listed companies in 2020. And then to share with you some of our collective insights and food for thought. So let me just jump straight into it. And let me just say before unveiling the results that the methodology that Ron outlined, when we completed our initial assessment, we shared the results with each company individually, and each company had an opportunity both to see the instrument and to question us as to how we arrived based on their annual report at the scoring that we did arrive at. There was very little contention, let me say, because as I say, the object of the exercise is to raise the standard of governance practice. So the results, when we compared the companies listed on the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange using their annual reports for 2020 against the international benchmarks that we'd gathered, this was the ranking that emerged. Out of a maximum score of 29, and note at the top, you'll see NCB Financial Group, JMMB Group Limited, and Massey Holdings really led the way. Their reports were fulsome. They went not only into reporting that they were doing an activity, but some went into the impact of the activity as well. What we are hoping is that what we have aimed, how we've structured today is so that these companies would actually share with the rest of us the approach that they have taken to governance and the importance and how it fits with their delivering their business strategy, which has led them now to the point where in our ranking, they actually lead the way. That's against the international codes. If you're looking at the results for all the companies that we looked at, this is the result when we rank all the companies. You'll see the top three there, followed in various degrees by the other companies. And one of the insights that we learned from this as well is that there needs to be special cognizance given to companies who may not be operating entities, but more of an investment nature. But that's something we can discuss when we get into the question and answer session. When we look at these are the most common disclosures. So for instance, these are the disclosures that most often appeared in each of the reports. All but one of the reports indicated whether their CEO and chair role was occupied by two different people. Good practice from a governance perspective encourages you to have those roles occupied by two individuals. And where due to the company circumstance, it's not possible because some companies, like for instance, Marks and Spencer's in the UK, went through a period in their strategic development where it was actually made sense for a brief period to actually have their CEO and chair as one person. Good governance guides, because that's what good governance is doing, guiding you. Good governance guides that in those circumstances, the company is encouraged to make sure that there's a senior independent director on the board of such gravitas and experience that they could counterbalance the concentration of power that is perceived to exist in one position when you combine the CEO and chair's position. Again, it's perceived in governance terms to be a risky thing to do. So therefore, in the governance field, we also suggest, well, how can you mitigate and manage that risk? Because nothing about governance is black and white. Other common disclosures, many companies talked about the CSR data. And I call it CSR data deliberately as opposed to information, because there was a lot of reporting of activity, but little reporting on impact, and little reporting as to how the particular CSR program or employee engagement actually tied back to advancing the particular strategy of the company. It may sound obvious, but it wasn't stated. A lot of companies are sharing the competency, skill mix, and basic demographic data about their directors, which is a really great step forward. Many companies are actually sharing it for photographic pictures as well. So here we have an ability to look at, well, who was actually in the leadership and who's leading this organization. Most companies, except one, declared the shares held by their directors, and corporate governance activities were reported quite widely. So most companies reported on which committees that they had, which committees existed, how those committees were made up, who chaired the committee. And in some of the better reports, they actually gave you a body of work that committee would do. So they didn't just say, well, we had an audit committee. They said, look, this is the body of work that the audit committee undertook during the year. Or if they had a nomination committee or a governance committee, this is the body of work that committee undertook. It doesn't take a lot. You don't have to go into a lot of detail, but it very much gives a much more granular insight to how the organization is being led. When we look at the Trinidad and Tobago Code, and the Trinidad and Tobago Corporate Governance Code was published in 2013, which is a point I come back to at the end of my presentation, because one of the pressing issues is that we need to update that code. When we looked at the code, and for those unfamiliar with the code is structured around 5 principles. And then you also have guidance with regard to how you can apply those principles. And most definitely, you're given further information as to some of the practical issues and insights in applying the governance principles. When we looked at the annual reports for the companies quoted on the stock exchange for the 2020, this was the ranking. Out of a maximum score of 23, there's one company who actually ticked all the boxes, in terms of what needed to be declared. As the instrument is developed, we will be getting more rigorous with regard to the measure that we're using to judge compliance. But at this point in time, the narrative describing, getting into a bit more detail about how the particular principle has been applied within the company is the yardstick that we have used here. And we would hope over time to see, well, that one, everybody will move up the scoring. In addition to that, we will actually be advocating very strongly that the code is brought up to date in ways that I'll talk about later. So this is the result. So when you look at now the result for all the companies, this is how they fared. You have the top 3 at the top, very closely followed by a bunch, and then as peters out, you will see here that we haven't analyzed it by manufacturing or banking. These are improvements that we'll do as we report in future years, so that you can have a sector ranking as well as an overall ranking. This is we're just showing you here side by side. If you look at the top 5, you'll see the top 5, whether it's international codes or local codes, the top 5 are the companies within the top 5 are pretty common, which is what you would expect. When we looked at the Trinidad and Tobago Code and the 5 principles, we were also in a position to assess the percentage of compliance, the degree of compliance overall for all of the companies we looked at. And what we were very pleased to find that when you look at establishing a framework, that principle, and so for instance, one of the examples of what falls within that principle is that, the chairperson of the board should be a non-executive director, and preferably an independent director. Where the chairperson of the board is not an independent non-executive director, the board should appoint a lead director. There are 5 guidance notes with regard to the application of this principle. And we found when we looked at the 5 and we looked at the performance based on what was reported in the annual reports of the 27 companies, we found as high as an 82% compliance with this principle in the code. Yes, there are improvements and we can point to improvements that can be made, but we thought that showed how applicable that the code is being used, number one, and that there is benefit in actually looking at how the code can be implemented within your company. When we looked at strengthening the composition of the board, the overall percentage compliance wasn't as high. Let me give you some examples of what falls into that principle. Directors should be selected and appointed through a rigorous and formal process designed to give the board a balance of independence and diversity of skills, knowledge, experience, perspectives, and gender among directors so that the board works effectively. What we were looking for there is how the organization goes about doing that. Yes, a lot of organizations publish a skill mix for their boards, and they actually then they just say this is a skill mix of our current complement of directors. What many companies didn't go on to say was, well, how do they use that skill mix? How does that skill mix match to the competencies that the company believes it needs at board level to take it into the future and to deliver its current strategy? How does that skill mix inform how appointments to the board are handled? So yes, the skill mix is there, the competencies are shared, but the how is the information used wasn't actually very well reported. The other principle, reinforcing loyalty and independence of directors, that includes, for example, the board should undertake an assessment of its independence on an annual basis and disclose in the annual report whether each non-executive is considered independent. And this is a bit of a tricky one because you have many situations where directors are on the non-executive directors are on the boards for more than 9 years. And there's a 9-year, there's an international standard and there's a requirement in our particular code that after 9 years, someone is not regarded as independent. Of course, they will always be, if they're non-executive, that doesn't change. But if they're on the board more than 9 years, they're not technically defined as independent. And now, why is that important? Well, in some codes, particularly the UK codes, your audit committee is supposed to comprise exclusively independent directors. Your nomination committee, the committee, whether it's called a nomination committee or not, that determines the remuneration of the executive and the chairman of the board, should have a majority of independent directors. So there are particular roles and expectations with regard to the role that independent directors will play in the leadership of the organization. So it's important to understand which of your directors are independent and which of those are approaching that or past that 9-year watershed. And let me underscore here, it doesn't mean that someone clearly does not mean that someone suddenly becomes an ineffective director, if they pass the 9-year watershed. That's not the idea. The idea is to say, well, hold on, there are special duties and responsibilities that fall to independent directors, and therefore you just need to monitor in terms of how you refresh your board, and when you refresh your board, that balance between the independent and non-independent directors. The next principle, fostering accountability, that really looks at the board on an annual basis should report to shareholders and stakeholders on the external auditor's involvement in non-audit work. This is just one of the examples. There is a very strong movement taking place internationally to actually break up the top 4 accountancy firms, not because they have done anything bad in particular or people have something against the accountancy firms. It's just that when looking at the most recent corporate scandals, there has been a sentiment and a feeling that had the auditors been separate from doing work, just had focused on audit and not on some of the other areas that generate management fees for them, they might have been a bit more aggressive with regard to some of the audit failings that were witnessed. I mean, I would say the jury's out, but let me say there is a strong movement internationally now to actually create what may be an audit authority within each of the, particularly in Europe, that actually only focuses on audit and the quality of audit, and creates a separate business for any other management consultancy work. And most definitely the code of ethics for the accountancy bodies, it very much steers your auditors away from getting involved in any type of work for the company that could involve them in management decision making. Sometimes the line is pretty thin, but it is there. So when the code is looking at fostering accountability, one of the areas it looks at is, are the companies declaring any non-audit work that they've asked their auditors to do? And if they are doing so, do they have a clear policy in place overseen by the audit committee that says, okay, in these circumstances, we will entertain our auditors, our external auditors, in getting involved in non-audit work. And outside these circumstances, we will not do that. So when it looks at fostering an accountability, the code is very clear that, and that's just one of the elements of fostering accountability. When we look at strengthening the relationship with shareholders, it's talking about on an annual basis, does the board report to shareholders and stakeholders on what work has been done? Do the shareholders have an opportunity to have their views expressed and entertained? And very much, of course, you would expect that the annual general meeting that is held is something that figures very strongly in the code within this section, within this principle. The fact that the annual general meeting is not only legally held, not legally required, but an approach is taken to it which encourages shareholders to express their opinion and stakeholders to actually get involved in what the company is reporting. So overall, we thought there was a very high, well, except for the dip number 2, a very high compliance with the Trinidad and Tobago Corporate Governance Code, which we took to be a very, very good and strong sign as the healthy approach to governance within the listed companies on our stock exchange. The next area I'd like to touch on is gender diversity on boards, which is a passion of mine. So why I have a captive audience, I will dwell on it for at least 2 minutes. The business case for diversity on boards, not just gender diversity, but diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of education, I think has been beaten to death. I think anybody who's asking for the business case to be made has not been reading their corporate, financial, strategic, or any other press for the last 10 years. So the case that diverse boards, not just gender diverse boards, let me say, diverse boards make better decisions, and the relationship between the ability of the company to forge ahead, to manage risks, to be successful, is positively related, positively correlated with the diversity of the thinking, of the experience, of the age, of the gender of your board. And when we look at the gender balance on the boards of the Trinidad and Tobago listed companies, as given in their 2020 annual reports, this is what we see. We see Angostura leading the way, 80%. So 4 out of their 5 directors are women. National Flour Mills, National Investment Company, Whitco. This is 2020, and I know at least one of the banks, which is Scotia, has actually hit the 80% mark for the 2021. For their 2021 report, they will really rocket up the chart next year. And as I say, I'm really talking about gender diversity, but here's the performance of the overall of all the other companies. Yeah, see Angostura leading the way. The international benchmark is that you need to have 30% of any underrepresented group for their voice to be heard. So if it's women, you need to have at least, the studies have shown, for their voices to be heard and their concerns to be registered, you need to have at least 30% of your board women. And in the UK, for instance, the target now is to get to 40%. And let me say, it is not just about 40% at board level, it's about 40% in leadership, which includes the board and the people who directly report to the board. So you have, if you don't do that, then you don't have an executive pipeline that will keep your, you'll keep that representation strong. So what we have seen, I'll just finish on this point before going to my food for thought. What we have seen, those of us that have been following this for a while, is that there has been a significant movement in terms of the proportion of women on boards. However, the movement has been in the category of the non-executive seats, not the executive seats. So getting an increase in the representation of executive women on boards still is proving to be a challenge. Again, something we'll pick up in the question and answer session as we go forward. So we'd like to close, myself, speaking on behalf of myself and Kamla and Ron, with some insights and food for thought. And I'm sure you'll be able to add to this list. The list can be copious, but these are the ones we'd like to share with you. We really do think there's a need to standardize non-financial reporting to enable the consumers of corporate reports to better navigate the volumes of data. This may sound strange, but I actually enjoyed reading all of those reports. I mean, I did yawn a bit when I saw 130 pages, 140, but actually when I got into each of the individual reports, and I think Kamla's experience echoed this as well, they were really interesting reading, I have to say. But we do need to standardize. We need to look at how we adopt ESG reporting standards. Now, ESG is not a settled sector as yet. There is the reporting standards, there's still competing standards, and that needs to settle. But the focus on integrated thinking and defining impact, not just activity, is something that is going to prove very compelling as we go forward. Of course, we need to update the local corporate governance code to reflect the latest thinking with regard to diversity in leadership, shareholder activism, and the stakeholder perspective. I mean, in the UK, one of the duties of directors right now is to demonstrate through their annual report and director's report how they have taken the stakeholder perspective into consideration. It's moved way beyond just saying, let's talk to the owners of the company. Now it's about talking to all of the people impacted by the company. Make compliance, and this is a plug, a personal plug, I think we should make compliance with the local corporate governance code mandatory for attaining a stock exchange listing, as well as maintaining the stock exchange listing. That happened, Jamaica has just issued their corporate governance code and they've chosen not to go down that line, I understand, but I know there's some Jamaican colleagues on the call today. The UK has definitely gone down that line. And let me say, compliance with the corporate governance code, the model that's been adopted in the Caribbean mostly, and in the UK and Australia, is one that it is voluntary, right? It is not mandatory. But let me say also, if I'm going to be very honest with you, that's a misnomer in the UK, because the complying with the code is voluntary. But then for listed companies, the stock exchange has made it mandatory for your listing. So yes, it is voluntary. You will see that all the headlines saying the UK Corporate Governance Code is voluntary. However, for listed companies, the stock exchange has actually made it mandatory. So, but I do think that to promote good governance and to make it have a bite, and sometimes it does need to have a bite for some of the more recalcitrant, that we should consider making it mandatory for attaining and maintaining stock exchange listing, your stock exchange listing. Two last ones I will close with. We need to develop sector-specific corporate governance guidelines. The weights principles were developed for large private companies in the UK, and that seems to have gone down quite well. And the OECD guidelines for state entities, we can actually adapt and develop that for our state entities. In no way do we need to start from scratch. There is very good work that has taken place within other territories that we can build on. And also we need to strengthen the requirements for companies to report on non-compliance within the corporate governance code. Our corporate governance code follows the model of comply or explain, which means then you either comply with the principle and you regale us with all the detail as to how you've complied, or you tell us, well, okay, we've complied with the principle, but not the actual guidance. So therefore, we've taken a different approach to applying the principle. So the principle is always applied. It's the guidance that sits below it that you may take a different take on. But the requirement in other territories is if you apply the principle but don't follow the guidance, then you should explain. You should make it explicit in your annual report which elements of the guidance you have not followed, and therefore which steps you have taken as a company that you feel provides the same level of risk management as the guidance would have provided. So that leaves companies very free to tailor their approach to the guidance based on the needs of their company and their point of development. At that point, I'll say, thank you for your time. I hope I've provided you with a lot of interesting information, and I look forward to re-engaging with you at the question and answer session. I now pass you back to Ron.
Thank you very much, Joanne. And just for a matter of information, it is time that our corporate governance code, TNT, to be updated. Of course, it has been out since around 2013. All right, and it's definitely required some form of review and updating. And as you presented, one must consider, and someone in the audience mentioned it in terms of the focus on gender. Of course, you have established that diversity is beyond the gender issue, which is true. But you think about a company like Angostura that has 80%, and you wonder if that is not the issue itself, because it's now imbalanced, because it's no longer diverse, right? So basically, we have just flipped it in those circumstances from one dominant gender to the other. And the question or the consideration that we have to keep in mind is balance, okay? The balance as opposed to, the majority. And I think this is something that we have to be careful about as we champion diversity. We cannot forget balance among that diverse thrust that we are trying to establish, because if not, we will be repeating the same patterns on previous years, okay? But at this point, again, thank you so much.
Ron, just 1 second. So I just wanted to point out that Mr. Ram Ramesh made that same comment in the chat a short while ago. So we wanted to acknowledge that he did in fact make that point. And quite a few persons are raising that issue. So thank you. Thank you for addressing it. And now we go to our panelists.
Exactly. Well, thanks again. And this is the type of feedback, and those findings help us to reestablish and reposition our thinking on what's the next step for improving governance, because we may champion something for a while and then realize it becomes a problem itself if it's not properly managed. So just to think about. We have 3 of our representatives from what we consider the top performing companies when you look at the international benchmark that we have used. Today, we will have them to share the respective companies' experience and provide some further insights as it relates to this disclosure practice and culture that they have developed over the years. With us today, we have Ms. Wendy Kerry, Senior Vice President, Corporate Governance and Corporate Secretary from the Massey Holdings Group. We also have Mr. Archibald Campbell, who is the Chairman of the JMMB Group Limited, and Mr. Dave Garcia, Group General Counsel and Corporate Secretary, NCB Financial Group. So we have a nice diverse panel in terms of companies and well, we have a little imbalance because we have 1 female, but that's fine in that sense. But I'll begin asking Ms. Kerry to share some of her company's experience relating to the disclosure and reporting. Ms. Carey? Sorry, you're still on mute.
How's that?
Great.
Sorry about that. So thank you, Ron. Good morning, Kamala and team at the CGCI and the team at the Arthur Lockjack Graduate School. Thank you for inviting Massey here to share a bit about our approach and our thinking in terms of disclosure. I guess we can start with, Massey's vision. Massey is vision focused, and our vision is a force for good. The most, the vision is the most responsible and profitable investment holding management company in the Caribbean Basin. And our mission is creating value, transforming life. Underpinning that, among our values are love and care and continuous improvement. And that sort of holds the space in which we do business and in which we try to communicate to our stakeholders. So the disclosure of information to shareholders and prospective investors equips them to make informed investment decisions or informed voting decisions. So we do look at the various rules, not just the TNT code. We look at global codes such as the UK code. We are now cross-listed in Jamaica, so we look at the Jamaica code. But we do try more to take a values-based approach as opposed to a rules-based approach to what we do. So, we want there to be an integrity in our reporting. It's and by integrity, I don't mean any sort of moral high ground or any sort of just strict regulatory compliance. I mean, reporting that's comprehensive, timely, balanced, fair, and just continuous improvement, every year on what we did the year before. We have had some benefits from taking that approach. Over the years, we have strengthened our reporting on our group enterprise risk, which has really been a great benefit. When we speak to, we have our quarterly investor meetings or meetings with institutional investors and analysts, and they give feedback and say, gosh, your annual report disclosures make our job easy. But at the same time, it's a huge benefit for Massey because they are able to understand the business at a deeper level. The truth is, we still have areas that we can improve upon, and we are always looking to improve upon these types of disclosures. And we talk about it on a regular basis. There are some initiatives that we've taken that we've strengthened both by adopting recommendations in the Trinidad and Tobago code, but also looking at global codes. One of them is we do implement now a triennial board evaluation. So in the past, we would have done our internal board evaluation, but we have, this year is going to be the second year that we are going to hire an independent firm to come in and do an evaluation for us. Out of that, we prepare an action plan for our board on the different things that we need to do to strengthen the board, its functioning, and its performance. So in addition to having that, we also have stronger performance conversations with directors, which also has led to greater focus on board refreshment. So, back in the day, we had, we didn't just have old, pale, and stale. We had directors that served, for life until they were required to retire from the board. Now it's, if you bring not just a particular skill set, I think the skills matrix is just one aspect of what you look at when you are recruiting for a board member. What you want to look at is the strategic intention of the company. So you marry the skills matrix to that. So this person will have a skill, but they must still have that competence to make you a director. the ability to see the interconnectedness of things, the strategic thinking, the ability to, have your voice and challenge, because sometimes you might find someone with a particular skill that don't have those attributes, and they can add something in a technical area, but they're not adding to the board as a whole. So our process around director recruitment and board refreshment and board evaluation has become a lot stronger. And as I said, there's always room for improvement. We did encounter some serious challenges on our governance journey. I would say we started working on improving our governance and our disclosure about a decade ago. And we were starting from absolute scratch. And it was a journey. It is still a journey of changing mindsets and changing culture, moving from the old ways of command and control, from the very top, to empowerment. And in Massey's history, I think many would remember and recall, we had a chairman who was also a CEO at that time. And we still to this day hear very interesting stories about it, and we laugh. We laugh because, it's so foreign. But some of these changes that we were able to make brought cultural changes for the organization. The change from command and control, which is also our colonial legacy, was a change of mindsets, a change of our Caribbean culture. It was something that we were able to start at Massey, and that was something that brought empowerment across the organization. I would say in terms of where we are at in our journey, I think Joanne she sort of touched on how the importance of ESG. We have also been on a journey of being very conscious of not what we do in terms of, making profit, but how we do what we do and the impact on it. And the 10-year journey was also that type of journey. And what we want to focus on for the future is not just disclosures, and we have been doing some of it, and there's definitely a lot more work to be done around it. Not just focus on disclosures that are material, but to focus on disclosures that are meaningful in terms of value, meaningful in terms of the impact on the people of the organization. One thing coming out of this pandemic, we have seen it has had a hell of an impact. Oh God, I don't know if I should have said hell. It's had quite an impact on our people. And, when we talk of ESG and we talk of impact, we have to find ways to make sure that business is sustainable, the impact on our environment. And how is that integrated? The impact on our people, and what do we do to ensure that we are doing all that we can to help those families heal? There was a lot of, struggle during that time. And, the one thing that is a huge passion for me personally, and I know for my organization, which I'm very proud of, is that, we believe that you cannot be a successful organization in an economy or in a society that is sick. So you do have a duty to all your stakeholders in a very real and meaningful way. That's it for me, Ron. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Very insightful, and I will end with the note that you just said. You are very much on this cusp, I will say, of taking another level of disclosure, but in ensuring that connection between business and society, let me put it this way, where you can tangibly measure the impact of what you do from that holistic perspective. And that is the next, that's governance 2.0 in that sense. This is where it is trending globally. And that is why, for example, the Business Roundtable in the US, the World Economic Forum, both would have established a repurposing of business and society, and which is aligned to your mission as a group, really being a force for good. So, thanks for those insights. We will definitely maybe have some questions for you from the audience and myself shortly. I would now like to invite Mr. Archibald Campbell from JMMB Group, the chairman of this group. Mr. Archibald, would you be so kind to share some of your experiences leading the GMM group over the period and disclosure practices.
Good morning, or good afternoon, all. It's still morning in Jamaica. Before I start, I would just like to give a little background that JMMB started in 1992. So JMMB actually started in 1992 in the financial services industry. So we're the new boys. And the strategy from day one is, how do you get into this market by coming in when you have established persons? I think that time, Dave can correct me, NCB was over 100 years old, Scotiabank and those other banks. So how do we do it? And we saw that openness has got to be the key. So we had some principles that guided us. I think maybe next one, in which we have seen an ethical culture, trust, integrity, honesty, openness, and yes, love. Here we were probably the first ones to speak of love in business. Care and good governance are the hallmark of our approach. And this tone must be set at the top. And the rules, the principles, the oversight strategy, we saw directors as advisors to management. And you have to get the rules very clear so that you don't have directors trying to be managers and managers being the directors. And the accountability, we define the expectations, the scope, responsibilities of the boards and the committees. And it's the importance of that is how, when new people come in, what is expected? How do they fit in? What are their roles? And the key in all of this is the oversight of risk. And we can spend a whole lot of time on that. Then, so therefore, when you ask the question, what has driven the JMMB group to adopt a comprehensive approach to it? It was based in our policy. It establishes how the group and its boards will be governed, provides a guide for the boards of directors in corporate governance, and ensures compliance with the relevant regulations. And the key of all of this is to garner that confidence in the market, because if you're talking of getting people's money, then people not knowing all of this from the new company have to see a structure, an arrangement in which people will operate and believe that their funds will be firmly in place, will be when they require it. And we came at a time when there were struggles in the Jamaican financial sector, and we went through all of those. So the key benefits for us is, next slide, is the confidence in the institution. JMMB is one of those institutions that has probably more listings on the Jamaican Stock Exchange than anyone else, because we never had a parent company to provide us with funds. We had to go to the market. We have to go to the market because of our growth trajectory. So therefore, we needed to have confidence. We see now that international agencies like IDB are willing to invest with us. And key in all of this, I think most people are aware of this score, the Net Promoter Score, in which your customers, how much are they willing to tell other people about you, your customers and your shareholders? And we are maybe, from what the people who do the survey tell us, we are maybe in a stratosphere by ourselves at 60%, over 60% in Net Promoter Score in every territory we go, because of the fact that we have made clear how we operate and how we actually get along with others. So if you find out that persons are always willing to partner with JMMB, and even when I know Dave is online, when NCB had a significant holding in JMMB, the relationship was of such is that we actually discussed and said that we are in the same industry, allow us to run the company as we see it, and that was done. They made exceptional returns on it, and we are in fact in partnership with Sagicor currently. We have had correspondent banking relations. We don't talk about it, but of the new institutions, and we hear how the Caribbean, there's lack of correspondent banking relations. We have always had that, and we continue to have that. And it's because our word is our bond. And to top it all, cash depositor for cambios. We basically are that institution in Jamaica that does that. And we know the high risk. But when these institutions come to audit, they have the confidence in our systems that we actually do. So, but we also have that influence, or we are garnering more and more of that influence in the Jamaica and possibly the Caribbean. When you look at seeing how our staff, Keith Duncan being the head of PSOJ and EPOC, Julian Mears being the head of the Jamaica Stock Exchange. We had Jerome Smalling, who was president of the Bankers Association. And even in DR, we had Juan Melo, who is chairman of their Chamber of Commerce, especially for Caribbean institutions. So we, in fact, believe that we have created that culture that people believe in what we do. So the other governance related issues, and I heard the debate about 40% or 80% being one institution. That's not our goal. Our goal, our stated goal is 60-40, either male, female, because especially if you have 15 members, you don't have a half person, so you can't say 33 and a third, or you'll get criticism. So it's 60-40, and it's either direction. It doesn't say it has to be male or female. Our target is 60-40. And we have seen, I think it's John who spoke of not discussing the need for women. I think that is now passé. We all understand the value of having different thoughts. Because believe me, male or female see things differently. Even the same item, they look at it from different perspectives. And when the board has the benefit of that, you are ahead of the game. Oh, plus we recognize that more women are like our institution. So most of our depositors are a higher percentage because of our outlook regarding women. We have been the leader in risk management, and I can say that clearly, because even some regulators, we have been in one country in which the regulators came and asked our people to train the rest of the industry or to help in the training of it. So we have a high degree of confidence by our regulators and auditors, and all of this is tied to having a good corporate governance structure. But sometimes, you can move to the next one. Sometimes it is difficult. But you have to stick to your principle under adverse conditions. And I might go back to, I think, 2008, when Lehman folded, and we were holding some Lehman bonds in our portfolio. And it was a tough decision. It was a tough decision that we sat and we said, should we let the market know of that? And we did. You had an initial reaction, but after a few days, it settled down and everybody knew. And I think what happened then is other institutions started speaking of their holdings. You know, it was a question of who didn't have. So it was a tough condition. The conditions were tough, but sticking to our principles, we have seen the value of it. And the other challenge is maintaining the standards set year in, year out, because the expectations of our clients, the expectation of our shareholders are there. And we, by putting it out, we are saying to the world, we are committed to these things, and we have to remain committed. You cannot go and then turn back and say, well, it is not good this year, so therefore we, no, share it. Share it, because the market recognizes the problems that we all have. And the last thing is the importance of adopting the approach to disclosure. For us, we see reliability. What you see is what you get. There are no hidden agendas, and the market will assess it. The confidence of stakeholders through their funding has seen JMB one of the fastest growing companies in the Caribbean. And from inception in 1992, we have been profitable every year. And we have stuck to our principles. So all I'll say to you is corporate governance creates value. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Campbell. And what you have shared, similar to Ms. Carey, is basically aligned to our whole cause here in terms of what constitutes good governance and why we are promoting it. And you underscored the point of what you do at JMMB is boosting the confidence and maintaining that confidence to shareholders and the general public, which then had these direct performance related kind of impact, such as your reputation, attracting funding, and being able to grow as you have done and have those cross banking relationships that it's not always easy to do. So thanks for sharing and underscoring the importance that disclosure and good governance will provide, especially reliability, confidence. And as you said, it creates and drives good values within the corporate culture at your company. So thanks so much for sharing those insights. And finally, we will have Mr. Garcia from the NCB Financial Group. As you know, he was the General Counsel, Group General Counsel and Corporate Secretary, and he has agreed to share, well, I will say number one in terms of the ranking, the NCB Group's journey as it relates to governance and disclosure. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Ron. I am very happy to be able to have this opportunity to share, and of course for the recognition that has brought this opportunity. I was happy also to hear from Wendy and Archibald, because and I think there are a number of sort of similar themes that would come up in anything that I would be sharing. But it's important that we recognize, I think, that we have a shared interest in stronger governance across the region. We're not very big. And when we consider the size of, when we consider the size and when we consider that this is where we all invest and operate, it is important. We have interests in across the region. We have interests in Massey, in JMMB, and we've at times had even greater interest in JMMB. We have directors who share across our entities and so on. So we really are, I think, all trying to head in the same general direction as quickly as we possibly can. And because NCB Financial Group, of course, is not based in Trinidad, I will spend a little time speaking about who we are, not too much, and then why governance and disclosure are of value to us and how we set and achieve our governance and disclosure aspirations. So NCB Financial Group is a licensed financial holding company with subsidiaries in multiple jurisdictions, and our shares are listed on the stock exchanges in Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. The entity itself was actually only incorporated in April 2016 to become a licensed financial holding company. Before that, what is now one of our major subsidiaries, National Commercial Bank Jamaica Limited, was both the bank and the holding company before we revised our structure. And so our roots in Jamaica at least go back to 1837, the age to which Archibald was making some reference earlier. Today, the group has nearly 100 entities across the Caribbean, of which we would see more than a dozen of them as being significant, both from a financial and risk perspective. And the services provided are across the financial landscape, including commercial banking, investment banking, wealth management, life and health insurance, property and casualty insurance, and pension management and administration. We're in over 20 jurisdictions. And we're organized into essentially 3 subgroups. The Clarion grouping headquartered in Bermuda, the Guardian group, of which you're obviously all very familiar, headquartered in Trinidad and Tobago, and NCB headquartered in Jamaica. And we have recently, within the last few years, established our purpose, really galvanizes into what we were into a statement of purpose, which is empowering people, unlocking dreams, and building communities. And you will see from that sort of purpose statement that it's anchoring us not just in strong financial performance, although that is something that's of importance to us. The size, and so why is governance and why are governance and disclosure important to us? Well, as you would imagine from the size and complexity of our operations and the breadth of the impact that we're able to have, we believe that brings an imperative for good governance if we are to achieve sustainable performance. We're not a small entity where a leader can get into all of the details. We actually need the structure, we need the policies, we need the plans, we need to understand how they cascade across the organization and how accountability moves laterally and vertically. So we have to have that right combination of plans, policies, practices, and frameworks to assess our risks and how they're being managed, and of course also for holding ourselves and our team members accountable for the standards that we set. Our stakeholders are multiple and typically not clearly defined groups. We sometimes speak about different stakeholder groups, and we talk about our leaders, and we talk about employees and customers and shareholders, etc. But in many cases, one person cuts across many of those groupings. And so many of our employees, all our employees are generally also customers, and many are also shareholders. And we have to, as we govern and also as we look at communication, think about those sort of cross-cutting themes in relation to our stakeholder groupings. We recognize that we're dependent on the trust, loyalty, and engagement of all these stakeholder groups if we are to achieve success for ourselves, which has to go hand in hand with success for all of those groupings and for the places where we operate, which I think is a point that Wendy had made earlier. And we have to recognize that those groups have a key role to play in defining what success means for them and for us. Regulators, as Archibald would have mentioned, are another key stakeholder group for us. They are relevant to our governance and communication practices, but regulation for us sets really just the minimum standard, and we're always seeking to sort of push the envelope and to determine how much further and how much better than what that minimum is can we actually be. And our our activities in relation to, I think we used to speak quite a bit about CSR, and now we're speaking a little bit about ESG. And I'll say that one of the things that's challenging us now is how to make that, I'm not sure whether at this point to call it a transition or an integration of those concepts. But one of the things that we're thinking about is how best to manage ourselves and to manage what we say about ourselves in the context of what is developing in that area. But we focus quite a bit on specific themes, one of which is education. And we do it for a reason, and we try, hope successfully in our annual reports, to say why it is that we focus on something like education. It's because we're looking at our future employees, we're looking at our future customers, we're looking many, many years down the road, in addition to looking at the present. We're thinking about who will we have available to lead NCB in the future. And do we have the right customer base to be able to take advantage of the types of products that we want to offer in the years to come? And so financial literacy, for instance, is important to us. Digital themes around digital and technology are important to us in education as well. And obviously, across our stakeholder groups, confidence is something that we regard as being critical. And that impacts very heavily our governance practices, but also how we approach disclosure. Ultimately, of course, the board has responsibility in respect of both our governance and our disclosure approach. But governance for us is really, it's not just about board leadership, it's about the entire organization. And it's, how we develop our governance practices and how also they cascade. And when you look at our organization, which employs over 6,000 people, that cascading is not a simple task. And we seek to have group practices, but we also have to have subgroup practices, and we also have to have individual company practices, and to determine where do we stop with holding company and where do we allow the innovativeness and the creativity and the culture of individual areas within the group to develop and to thrive. And that's an ongoing conversation and point of development for us. As we look at what we should do, we look at a number of sources. We take a look at, obviously, governance codes, those in the region and outside the region. We look at best practices. We do look at other annual reports and governance statements. And we're constantly pulling ideas and thinking about what's the best way in which not just to organize ourselves, but to have the conversation with the public about how we are organized. So we seek to have a governance structure always that can stand up to scrutiny, to provide enough information so that persons can know what it is, so that it can bring and maintain that degree of confidence that we're seeking to have with respect to our stakeholders. That can bring a number of benefits in addition to things like being able to go to the capital markets and raise funds and have persons be confident about who we are. It also sometimes brings suggestions from colleagues who would have seen things on our website or in our report and are able to come and say, what are you doing about X or Y? And have you thought about the following? So I find that the more that we say about what we do is the more information that we actually get about how we can even do better. Governance, as Wendy said, for us as well, is not just about setting down rules. We look to go beyond that. For us, it is also the framework for decision making. Not everything can be determined by a prescription in a policy. often what we think needs to be clear is who is to make what kind of decision and consulting who. And that therefore allows those persons to be able to proceed with clarity and with confidence. In respect of disclosure specifically, we have a fairly strong bias towards disclosing non-sensitive information quickly and with reasonable detail. And materiality, obviously, we do want to ensure that we meet that minimum threshold of disclosing what is material. But Wendy captured very well in her words something that I didn't have the word before it was time to speak. So I'm glad she spoke before me, because she spoke about disclosures that are meaningful. And I had about a paragraph that I would have given trying to capture just that word. So thanks, Wendy. So yes, that's what we try to do with our disclosures that are meaningful. We recognize that there's a balance that has to be struck. We're trying not to overload persons with information that they really don't need. And then we make a disclosure that's important and they don't even realize it because we've given so much information for persons to wade through. We also have to balance, when I speak about confidence, the issue of confidentiality, recognizing that we have customers whose data has to be protected and employees and suppliers. So we really have to be very careful about what we say and when we say it on an ongoing basis. We think also very much about what our key sources of disclosure are. The annual report, I know, is very much in focus for this forum, but we have a number of other sources in addition to the annual report, and our governance statement, by the way, in our annual report gets a whole lot of attention every year, because this is really where we get to focus on how we're governed as an organization, primarily at the board level, but throughout. But we have a number of other fora in which we make disclosures. Obviously, our website, our market releases, our investor briefings, and we regard the AGM also as an opportunity for that type of stakeholder conversation. So, if I have to summarize how we approach this, it would be, I think, in the words of Benjamin Franklin, where he spoke of doing well by doing good. And at the time when he said it, I think the focus in relation to the doing good part was very much on philanthropy. But we take a fairly expansive view in relation to doing good. It does include philanthropy, but it also includes how we execute what we do. And we're seeking to make sure that in the how, we're also always right. And that is really how NCB sees its place in the conversation around governance and around being transparent to the market about what we're doing. So those will be my, hopefully, few remarks, Ron, and I'll turn back over to you. And thank you again for this opportunity.
Very much appreciated, Dave Garcia. Forgive me for my pauses, but it's just so informative in terms of your sharing and the entire panel. And there's a common thread throughout each of your comments, is that you cannot divorce the issue of taking responsibility, the ethics in governance. In other words, trying to do good in whatever way you may express it, but it builds to that level of trust and confidence that the market ultimately will develop. Having that level of disclosure and informing your shareholders over time. And I'm speaking of time, I know that basically the time is up, but I would just like to invite each one of you, as you leave, just share one thought of advice that you can offer other companies about, embarking on this disclosure approach. You have said a lot, you have shared a lot, but is there any particular advice that you think that you can leave them with, at least one from each of you before you leave? I will start with Mr. Campbell.
Just remember that if you are trying to get people's money. Once you're listed on the stock exchange, you have to be open with them. You're stewards, company, of people's money. So therefore, they must have confidence in whatever you do.
Thank you. Wendy?
I would say, some of it can be overwhelming sometimes. And when you hear some of the, what's required for ESG reporting globally, for example, it can feel overwhelming. So what I would say is just a reminder to companies, just keep striving to do better. Just keep building on what you have and keep striving to do better.
Great, thank you. So the commitment to improve, that is the point. Thank you. And finally, Dave.
Yes, I would say get the right stakeholders to the table in looking at the structure and in looking also at at what one discloses. So in terms of structure, you're looking at risk management and your corporate governance committee and legal, the CEO's office, and so on. If you're looking at disclosures, I'll tell you that when we're looking at what needs to be disclosed and what needs to be said about it, sometimes we can have 5 different stakeholder groups becoming involved until we develop certain templates. If it's investor relations, corporate secretary, legal, communications, HR, finance, CEO, start with, I think, making sure that you get the stakeholder groups right, and then benefit from the richness of thought that comes from having all of those views at the table.
Thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, and the audience, I just want to express on behalf of the business school as well as the CCGI, our sincere appreciation to these panel members for taking the time. I know it was not easy to sacrifice this slot in the day, but aligning yourself to our efforts and sharing the insights that you have shared towards promoting and improving good governance practices, not only in TNT, but in a regional scope, given the scope of your own operations as group of companies across the region. So thanks again to you, Dave, Wendy, and Archibald. I'll hand you over now to Kamla. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ron. And I want to add our appreciation to all of our panelists and also to our participants today. I know we couldn't have gotten on to all the comments in the chat. I do want to respond to Terry Peterson, though. Terry is a member of CCGI, I think out of the Dutch Antilles, and he asked about whether the World Justice Project, that index, whether it informed our thinking in the ranking process, and I would simply say no, Terry, it didn't. That wasn't part of the criteria that was used, but certainly we'd be looking at all of these areas as we move forward. Also, I want to thank Mr. Das for his question. I did put in the chat, we need to always remember the name Greta Bush. Greta, who was with the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, she and the PSOJ really have been leading the Caribbean region in terms of corporate governance practices, and we are very grateful to be able to learn from their lessons. Greta, in fact, had indicated to us here at CCGI that there was a draft Caribbean code which had been submitted to CARICOM. So we will need to continue the good work that was started. CCGI, of course, this is our 10th anniversary. 10 is a lot we celebrate, but we recognize too that 10 means we're still pretty young. There's a lot to be done. And we are very, very grateful to all the persons in the region who do respond to our call. Let's gather together. Let us exchange ideas. Let us support each other as we learn to better understand this changing world and take charge of the direction that we want our region to grow. So I want to thank you all very much. It's been a great session today, and we look forward to doing this again and improve as we go. All right, so I look forward to seeing you all for future sessions of CCGI. Have a good evening. One, by the way, please do fill out the survey that Christy has put in the chat feature. We like to get your feedback in terms of the sessions and suggestions for improvement that you may have. So please make sure that you do that. And you could look out for the recordings of this session, which Christy will send to you tomorrow. Thank you, everyone, and have a good afternoon.